All right, I'm showing 9 on the dot, so we'll go ahead and get started this morning. First thing to notice is I am not Walt. With Kelly's situation, Walt is going to be out for a while, so I'm going to fill in this morning. Apologize. There is another class in the MPA. I can turn around a moment if you guys, I won't say anything if you want to slip off and go to the other class, but we'll try to muddle through this morning. This morning we're going to talk about relationships and gardening. So John 15, we'll pick up there. You will need your text. I won't have slides this morning, so if you got your Bibles, go ahead and get them out because you will need those. And we'll be starting there in verse 1 of 15. I unfortunately was not in here the previous couple of weeks. I've been attending in the other class, so I'm not exactly sure where Walt left off. But we'll jump in. If you guys raise your hand and say, hey, he already covered this, or you jumped too much, just let me know. But we'll try to pick up in John 15, verse 1. Can somebody read 1 through 8?
I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples.
All right, thank you. Anybody in here raised grapes? You ever tried to grow them? Blackberries, yeah. So they have blackberries. I guess would be a similar type of a situation. You really have to prune them back. I have seen, pictures of vineyards before the fruit has come on, before they start leafing out. And what you've got really, well-tended vineyard is the vine that comes up, extends out, but it's been cleaned off. There's nothing there. And then as the season progresses, the branches start to develop along those vines, and then those is where you get the fruit. I've been told what happens is in a vineyard that's not tended, that you wind up with just a big mess. And I've grown blackberries, and so have you ever seen a blackberry bush that hasn't been pruned? That's almost impenetrable at some point to try to get through those, and so it's a big mess. And what happens is you've got to clip all that stuff down back to its root, and then burn it, throw it away, get rid of it. What happens if you don't?
They don't bear fruit.
Yeah, they don't bear fruit.
They'll bear some, but not much.
Yep. And it's usually not very good fruit, is it? It's kind of same thing with grapes. They don't. And would this have been something that would have made a lot of sense to someone in Jesus' audience at that time? Probably. Yeah. Israel was a prime environment for growing grapes. It's got the right climate, the right soil. In fact, I think at the opening of the doorway of the temple, there was gold vines and fruit, on display as part of the decoration for the doorways. What else has been referred to as a vine? Israel. Yep. Yeah, so if you go back into the Psalms or back into Isaiah, there's references there to God calling Israel a vine that he planted. So when Jesus says, I am the true vine, what statement's he making?
There's nothing lacking. He is true. That's not what I'm trying to say. He's pure. There was no fault in him.
Yeah, no fault. In fact, if you go back into the Psalms and stuff where it talks about Israel being referred to as the vine, there seems to be, in a couple of cases at least, where it's talked about how rotten that vine's become, how it's not bearing the fruit that it needs to. And so Jesus is making a stark contrast there between the image of the vine that God planted with Israel that did not turn out to be according to his plan, or at least according to his desire for them. And Jesus, who is the true vine, the perfect vine, the true representation of God. Has anybody heard this section of Scripture being misused in terms of what the branches and the vines are? So one time I heard somebody from the denominational world talking about this shows that Jesus prophesied that we were going to have all these denominations because it's a vine with all these different branches. See anything wrong with that?
Well, yeah, because he's not speaking about groups of people, he's talking about individuals.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no indication here that he's talking about different sects or different things that are going to pop up, and it's okay because they're all connected to the vine. This clearly, if you going to Galatians where he talks about the body with multiple parts, I think that's what he's talking about here, right? I mean, I think that's pretty obvious to us, but I did want to bring that up because I've heard that, and I've found it a bit strange when people try to back end situations into the Scripture, and this clearly doesn't seem to be the case here. So he talks about the vine dresser pruning the vine, removing the dead and the sickly growth. What happens once something's been removed from the vine? Can it produce fruit? No, it's dead. And I think then, Jesus starts talking about apart from him, you can't do anything. You're separated from the vine. There's, back in John 15, he talks about him. You can't do anything without him. So what does it mean to be attached to the vine? Obviously it's not literal, right? We're not all carrying an umbilical cord plugged into something around with us. What does that look like?
Well, we deal with our relationship to Christ.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to expand on that?
Well, if we are in him, we're going to bear fruit, and if we're not, we won't.
So what does that mean to be in him?
Well, I think it means, go on, Kevin. I'm sorry, I walked in late, I'm in the middle, I shouldn't say anything, but didn't he say your words remain in me, something like that? So part of it would be that we have his word dwelling us and guiding us.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the areas that I think he teases out in this, that he actually doesn't tease out, he actually states in this passage here is, to be in me is to be in my word. It's to be in my commands. It's to understand what I want and to do it. There's other parts that are coming up where he's going to start talking about other parts of that relationship. But I think in this section, it's really reflecting, are you doing what I told you? Did you listen? Did you hear? That's being in me, is being in my words, understanding what I want you to do, and then, of course, doing it. So we talked about the unproductive branches getting thrown in the fire. I mean, is that, you think that's, there's got to be some literal thing that comes to mind, right, when you think of that? What would that mean to you?
Doesn't sound good.
No, it doesn't sound good. I read a little, as I was doing the study, a little bit of equipment that says, you know, because it talks about pruning, and, you know, obviously that's a process that probably doesn't sound all that good either, to be pruned. But one gentleman made the statement, it's better to be cut than burned, right? So that's, that kind of stuck with me. I think that's going to stick with me a while. It's better to be cut than burned. So when he talks about bearing fruit, what does that mean to you? How would you know if somebody was bearing fruit?
When I was growing up, this was almost always used in the context of evangelism as a soul, but I think it's much broader than that. I think, you know, you have the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians chapter 5. I think it is more the way we live. And as we live, will there be some evangelism? Sure, but there are a lot of other ways that we show Christ in our lives.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Because I wanted to, that was exactly the point I was hoping to make, because we do go immediately to that, bearing fruit, and we think about the number of souls that we brought to Christ, which is all important. But I think when Christ talks about bearing fruit, there's a lot more there. There's hospitality, there's kindness, there's gentleness, there's all those fruits of the Spirit, patience. So can you, in your life, when you see your brothers and sisters out there, could you tell that they're bearing fruit? Are you able to say, yep, that's a fruit bearer? Is that something obvious to you?
I think it is over time. As we get to know one another better, we can see that, or we don't.
Yeah. Have you ever seen somebody getting pruned? Or, well, I should even say, have you seen yourself getting pruned?
I think there's quite behind the scenes kind of people that are doing things that are not out in the open, but they're serving, they're teaching, I think they're bearing fruit. It just may not have come to fruition yet.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. There's a lot of stuff, and the people you aren't necessarily as close to, maybe more of that stuff is hidden from you. You know, that probably speaks to a couple of things, right? Shouldn't we be getting that close? And second is, yeah, there's a lot of people that are very humble, that do work behind the scenes. A lot of people that are the people who are praying in the closets, right? And isn't that the attitude that we're supposed to have? But who does see the fruit? Well, God, right? I mean, it's not. So just because we don't see the fruit hanging there doesn't mean it's not there. It may be hidden behind a leaf that we can't see through. But I guarantee you, there is one that sees it all. So what are some of the benefits of staying on the vine? Not being, you know, remaining connected. These are not hard questions. So.
Nourishment, you continue to grow.
Yep. Okay. What does that look like to a Christian? That nourishment.
I'm not sure I can describe it.
Yeah, because it probably does take multiple forms, right? So the probably the most visible, the most I shouldn't say visible, but probably the one that's easiest to jump at is the nourishment of the word, right? What else?
Biggest one's the promise of eternal life. Fruit.
Yeah, that's huge, right? That's a definite benefit of staying on the vine.
And think of the life that we live. We're living the eternal life now. We're just living the temporary part of it now. We're waiting for the permanent part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that one is probably just made clear by the whole discussion of being burned, right? I mean, staying on the vine means you're not going to be in the fire. That's a definite benefit. What else? What about sense of identity? If you're connected to the vine, your association, your relationship, who you are, your very being is defined as a branch on that vine, right? If you're disconnected from it, you're in the pile of rubble that's either going to be burned or is burned. So it gives us that sense of being, of belonging, of our very identity, right?
When you keep reading, we're gonna see the love we have for one another.
Yep. In fact, that's where we're going next. So if someone can read 9 through 17.
As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. And if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lays down his life for his friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you will love one another.
So obviously, being connected with Christ, the true vine, is really love, right? It's love for him, it's love for each other, it's love for the word, it's love for keeping his commands, and what comes with that? Joy. So, are we always joyful when we're keeping Jesus' commands? Well, I'm not. Sometimes I do things that I know I should be doing, but I may do them a little bit begrudgingly.
Sometimes take a short-term view of what joy means.
True.
If you get friends, expect that just comforting.
Yeah.
In the moment.
In the moment. Yep.
6 months, a year or two later, you recognize, if you think about it, that was a good thing.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Jack. Sometimes we take a too limited a view of what joy means. But have you ever been through times in your life where you just really weren't feeling it? And I don't mean feeling emotionally. I mean you just didn't feel like you just kind of became blasé about the whole thing. It was like, running through the motions, but you really weren't in tune with what this really means to you in your life, which is really kind of what joy is, right? It's accepting and acknowledging how great the situation is, that God the Creator loves you enough that He found a way to reconcile with us sinful people living in a fallen world, and the things He's going to do for us and the things He does for us, how amazing that is. And do we ever lose track of that? Yeah, yep. It's kind of a rhetorical question because I think I know everybody's answer, right? Sometimes we do, and I think, are those the points maybe where the pruning comes in? So previous to this, and I don't know, again, I wasn't in here when Walt covered the earlier parts of this, or even Ken, but Jesus is pretty much, the setting here is, right, we've had the Last Supper, He's sitting, He's talked to them, He's told them what's coming, He's been betrayed, at least He knows He's been betrayed at this point, and they apparently have gotten up from the meal, and He's continuing to tell them, what you need to be ready for here. And one of the things He says is, you're already clean because of my words, right? I've told you that you're clean. But then He turns around and says, but you're going to be pruned, which I understand the word for prune and clean are the same. It's the exact same word, but just used in this context, it's taken to mean pruning. What does that say to the fact that pruning is going to occur, right? So did the disciples need pruning at that moment? Well, not according to Jesus. He said, no, you don't. You're clean. He had just washed their feet too, and went through that whole conversation with Peter about you're already been bathed. You don't need your whole body washed. You just needed your feet cleaned. So do you think the disciples and the apostles here, did they at some point have to endure pruning? Yeah, so where I'm going with this is we should be acknowledging in our lives that there are going to be times when we need pruning, when we're feeling that lack of joy, when we're feeling that lack of connection to the vine, or we don't feel like we're bearing the fruit. And I think it's even more, we don't feel like we're obviously not bearing the fruit that we want to be bearing to reflect the love of Christ. So how should we approach that pruning? And I think Jack kind of hit on it earlier. Should we get grumpy about it? Should we feel like that we're being singled out, or is this, we're being persecuted by our brothers and sisters, or by the Word?
My personal experience with it was parts of my life where things were really going, what seemed to be going really wrong. Turn to the scriptures, which is what I did, looking at some examples of people who just, the bottom's falling out of the basket, going with it. What did they do? You wind up with some reasonably exalted company in the scriptures that went through the same emotions you're going through and came out of that process being better than they had been before. And Jesus has just told them that He's telling them they're His friends. So when He is not they've lost their leader, they can begin to think in terms of what he said about them. And I think that that's what has the same effect. You know, I know he's gone, but he said we were his friends, and he chose us.
Yeah.
So there's something, he chose us for a reason. What is it we're supposed to do? And they may be asking themselves that question at time before Pentecost, but we're here for a reason.
Yeah. Yep. And I think it goes back to you know, what we said yesterday. I mean, earlier. Seems like yesterday. Earlier is the part of being connected to the vine is understanding your identity, understanding who you are. You know, what is that nourishment that's running through your branch? You know, what are you tapped into, and remembering that. So, Jack, you mentioned you know, Jesus said, "You're my friends now," as opposed to servants. What's one of the key differentiators there? What makes a friend? You know, Jesus talked about it a little bit, but what does that mean to be a friend versus being a servant? So do servants always know what's going on?
Your relationship has changed.
You understand each other better.
Yeah. So I've never had a servant, but I've been a servant at work, right? And I think that's probably more, we could probably all relate to that. Did your boss always let you know what was going on when he told you to do something? Now, there's lots of assignments I was given, go do this. I had no idea why. I didn't understand the plan. I didn't really know, you know, how things were going to fit together at the end. Do friends know what's going on when they're asked to do stuff? Usually. And if they don't, they usually ask why. You know, what does this mean? So I think Jesus here is basically saying, listen, the situation here now is, I've been with you, I've told you what's going on, I've revealed what I know to you, I've shown you the Father through me. You know, you've got it now. You've got the context. You're not a servant that's operating blindly anymore. I'm leaving you with these commands. I'm leaving you with these instructions. And I think that's a pretty key difference, right? In the relationship that we've got. Now, did Israel, when God revealed, you know, the commands through Moses and the stuff, the law, were they servants or friends? I know I took the level of question down a little deeper. Maybe takes a little more thought. Well, I don't think so. I don't think that, I don't, because it's not, it doesn't appear to me that, I think if you, examination of the situation here is, Israel wasn't given the end plan. They had prophecies of what was coming, but they never really fully understood or had it laid out like Jesus laid it out. Would you agree with that? Yeah, I mean, they were given a lot of foreshadowing that makes sense now to us, looking back. I'm not sure, and this is just me. Does anybody read the old prophecies and look at that and go, yeah, that would have made sense to me. I would have caught that. Honestly, would you? I mean, Isaiah is a amazing book, but I can't imagine reading it without knowing the end of the story, or at least the good parts of the story. So I think Jesus now has come and said, listen, we can be friends now, because you've got the information. You've got what you need to know. I've told you how to do this. I've shown you what God is through me. Let's be friends.
Well, in 1 Peter chapter 1, he speaks of the prophets didn't know everything. And then he concludes verse 12, even angels long to look into these things. So even the angels did.
Yeah. I know sometimes I catch myself being a little arrogant though when I look at the Old Testament scriptures, and go, hey, yeah, they should have got that. Why didn't they get that? Well, honestly, I wouldn't have gotten it. We wouldn't have gotten it. Yeah.
On the other hand, the prophet's main message to the people of Israel throughout all the ages was repent and quit following idols and be true to the one God. They weren't interested in even paying attention to that, much less trying to figure out what the future might bring.
Yeah, and I think that's key to Jesus. As he's talking to these people, one of the key messages here is I've changed that equation. Right? The prophets were really basically saying, Israel, get back in line with doing what a servant should be doing. Right? Follow my commandments, follow my law, get back in line. Jesus is saying, okay, I've still got my commandments out here. I still need you to follow it, but it's a different relationship now. We've switched over from a servant to a friend. You've become part of the in crowd. You're part of the lunch table now, not just the people serving the lunch. Is that? I think that's where you're kind of going, right?
Keeping his commandments is the condition for being his friend. So the things that he's talked about, we should be doing.
Yeah.
The study of the word if in the New Testament is very interesting because you find out how many conditional blessings there are.
Well, and in fact, even here in John 15, the ifs are numerous. I think there's like 7 or 11 or something. There's a bunch of if statements, if this, So that's exactly right, Jack. That part of the probably the main part, the only part of remaining in this friendship is to do what he wants you to do. You ever had friends that weren't doing what you needed them to do, and what happened in those situations? I mean, friendships aren't permanent, are they? I know sometimes they become acquaintances, sometimes they become people you don't want to associate with at all anymore. I could probably not too many, but I could probably come up with an example in my life, and I'm sure you may have had that situation as well. And that maybe that part of that cutting the branches off the vine and throwing them in the fire. All right. So someone please read, we'll just go ahead and do 18 through 25.
If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. But all these things they will do to you on account of my name, because they do not know him who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have been guilty of sin. But now they have no excuse for their sin. whoever hates me hates my Father also. If I had not done among them the works that no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. But now they have seen and hated both me and my Father. But the word that is written in the law must be fulfilled. They hated me without a cause.
So somebody probably has a study Bible. Where's that come from, that last statement? It's in the Psalms, right? It's part of that, all of those messianic things that you'll see sprinkled that may not have looked obvious to the casual reader initially. So, kind of switched gears here, right? Went from love and bearing fruit to what? So again, remember the context here. He's either gotten up from the table where he's been talking about, what's going to happen ahead, and they're either there, somewhere, or maybe they're even walking to the Garden of Gethsemane at this point. And he's talking, and I like to even probably picture in my head, he's walking along, they're on their way to Gethsemane, and they've got a vineyard, and he's talking about the vines and the branches, using that as an example. And then all of a sudden, he does what? He switches to what? He's basically warning him, right? Basically telling him what's your life going to be like when I'm gone. So up to this point, Jesus has been the one that's bearing the hatred, right? Because he's there. He's the one that's targeted. His disciples by association, sure, but they weren't the brunt. They weren't the ones taking the questioning and the abuse and the pushback. So what's Jesus saying here? He's saying things are going to change. I'm going to be gone, and you're the ones that's going to be hated. Because you're the ones that are going to be representing me. Better get ready. Better understand what it means. But one of the things I think it was interesting is he basically says, but as this hatred turns on you, what should you remember?
Already happened to Jesus.
Yeah. Basically, he says, it's not you, it's me. They're going to hate you. They're going to persecute you. But it's really because of what you mean in terms of myself, right? You're going to be the immediate target, but the world's going to hate you because of me. So he's basically telling them, listen, you've got to understand that this is not personal against you. This is who you are. I mean, it is personal against you, but it's basically, it's not because of your words, it's because of me and my words, that you're going to be hated, you're not going to be accepted. But then he takes that by extension one more direction. Who does he bring in now? So they're going to hate the disciples, they're going to hate him. What does that mean? Who does Jesus represent? Father? Yeah, I mean, he basically says, listen, they're going to hate you because of me, but because they hate me, they hate the Father. So this is pretty deep, right? And he uses some terms here that are interesting, and I'm not sure I'm at the depth that I could really do justice to them. But one of the things he talks about is you know, if I hadn't come, these people wouldn't they wouldn't have sinned. There would be no sin. That's not exactly face value, right? I mean, Romans talks about the fact that we're all sin. There is sin. Sin is in the world, right? It's there. It should be obvious. So what's Jesus really talking about there? Jim, I know you're ready to jump on that one. What does he mean by that? They would not be guilty of sin. Well, I think he's just saying that they have no excuse. You know, in this immediate context, you've got Jewish crowds, you know, that are being driven into a frenzy by the Pharisees. They look at him as a true enemy, right? They look at him as someone, they in their twisted version of reality, they think maybe they're defending the Father, right? You've got this guy who's claiming to bring himself up to the same level of God. You've got, you know, these teachings that are going against what they consider to be, you know, the inspired version of commandments that they should be living by. This guy is changing the focus away from Moses' law, and if Jesus hadn't come, would they be right?
Well, I see in this verses 23 and verse 23, if I had not come and spoken to them, they wouldn't have been guilty of sin. So it's talking about the words that he spoke. But in verse 24, he's talking about the works he did. He lived what the words had to teach.
Yep.
Right? And it's easy to teach words. It's much harder to live that way.
Yeah, so maybe where I was going very poorly is to say, you know, Jesus, he proved everything, right? He used his works. Everything about Jesus pointed out what God really wanted with humanity. And without him coming and pointing that out, these people would still be floundering in the old law. Now, would they have been guilty of the immediate sin of rejecting God? I think maybe that's what's really being pointed out here is that this is something that, you know, this is a sin that's happening and is going to happen in a big way here, right? When they turn him over to be crucified. And Jesus is saying, listen, all these works I've done, everything I've shown them just proves their guilt. It just shows that they are guilty in the way they're thinking, in the way that they've rejected God, the way that they've they've hated the Father. All right. We're out of time, and I'm like, whew, we're out of time, because these next few verses, when we start talking about the Holy Spirit, kind of open up a whole new line of topic. So we'll save that for whoever is here next week, or maybe they'll start somewhere else. But I appreciate your attention. Again, apologize, Walt's out, and so you kind of got the second string fill in this morning. But hopefully next week we'll resume with John 16.